Danae.
And Kiveli.
And today we have another discussion video for you.
So what I wanted to ask you is, what do you think is the right balance between compromise and sticking to your own opinion? Specifically now I was thinking also in the context of a rehearsal.
So if the other musician brings in an idea but you don't agree, how much you should
I mean, there
compromise?
are so many levels to it. I mean,
Yeah.
you might play with someone for the first time and you realize maybe your visions are not very similar. You might also be playing with someone you already played a lot and it's just a tiny little thing. So
Yeah.
to just general idea between compromise, trying to look out for the harmony between the chamber musicians, and really also laying high value on fulfilling your own musical vision.
I think ideally there is no such thing as compromise that has to be done in a chamber music group, because even if you have different views, the different view that the other musician brings in is one that still resonates with you and that makes sense to you. So to me, like, the word compromise in that setting has a very negative ring to it.
Yeah,
And I would definitely try to never do that. Well, I mean, of course, I would also try to choose to play with people where I don't have to compromise. But I think that if you are in the situation where there is a chamber music partner that has a completely different approach to the piece than you do, I would first definitely try to explain my view. And for example, if it's a tempo, really try to give him reasons why I think it has to be faster or slower, what the composer said, and so on. And then, in a way, try to convince him if I feel very strongly about that, and then see what he has to offer. I mean, maybe he has an interesting reason too, and maybe he has read a book with new exciting evidence about the tempi. So of course I would be open to hearing his view, but musically I would try to never compromise, because when you're on stage you have to be 100% convinced of what you're doing. So if you're doing something that you don't like, then you can't convince. So I think I would be ready for him to convince me. If I'm convinced, I'm super happy to change my approach as well. But if I'm not convinced, I don't want to compromise.
Yeah, of course, I totally agree with that. And of course, it's not an ideal scenario if you have to feel that you have to compromise.
Yeah.
But I also think that it is unrealistic to say that we're sometimes in control of it. I mean, many times you play within festivals with people that you haven't specifically planned it. And even sometimes between people that are usually totally of the same opinion and come from the same style, there might come a point where the opinions differ. I mean, even within stable ensembles, I feel like there are situations in which compromise is needed. Compromise does have a negative ring to it, but in which sort of you have to play something in a different way than you would have played it if it was just you. And I don't mean that in a sound balance type way, but I mean that you might have to, I don't know, it's an interesting question, because for example, I have heard of stories where I wasn't in the ensemble myself, but people that I know very well, of situations where notoriously rehearsal almost broke up the ensemble, or broke up the potential performance, because people were so much of a different opinion, and then in the end people decided to go one person's way. And I think it's an interesting dynamic, and sometimes if I agree with the person's way, then I think to myself, wow, good for you for being able to really explain and convince the other people into playing it that way. However, I know that if I were in that position, I think I'd very rarely accept a worse atmosphere in a rehearsal in order to put through a point of mine. You know, of course it depends on the topic, but I think I find myself always gravitating towards a harmonious atmosphere in the rehearsal rather than, you know, really dogmatically putting through my opinion.
Yeah, I think a very important point is also the, like, taking away your ego, because when you're making music, it shouldn't be about you and your views, it should be about the music, of course. So even if you have two very contrasting approaches to the piece that might each have its own validation, I think it's important to then not be like, okay, this is my way, this is my way, I'm going to stick to it, but as I said before, be open to at least being convinced, because in the end,
absolutely,
you're there for the music. And sometimes, for example, I mean, this is a technique that I would also recommend if you're in a chamber music rehearsal and you're trying to, you know, show a different approach. For example, if your idea is that it should be much faster, sometimes what I do and what I've seen many people do is to first say, okay, let's try it radically faster, like almost ridiculously fast, just to get that completely different feeling. And then from that extreme, okay, now we take it away a little bit, and then we show the actual view. And I think that's a way to, you know, get the other person be open to your view. And I think it's important that if you are on the receiving side of this, also to take away the ego and serve the music and not think of it so much as compromise if you are now, you know, agreeing to a different opinion, just like you just said. And also it doesn't have to be at all a negative atmosphere in the rehearsal, but to somehow just make music in that new way. You know,
I think that there are definitely techniques, like things that I try to think about, especially also within a rehearsal where more people are involved, or maybe where an orchestra and a conductor is involved, things like that, to really pick the things that you feel passionate about. Even if you have a totally different approach, I think you should really decide what are the things that are close to your heart, what are the things that you have a real reason for wanting to change, rather than just, well, I like it better if this goes crescendo or diminuendo.
Not just like go through the piece and stop every second and be like, this one. This one.
And the other thing that I have to say, which is just my thing, I know that people sometimes are not necessarily put as much value on it as me, is that whenever I propose a change, I always want to explain why. Not just because I like something better in my gut, but because there is an actual justified reason to change it, because something is written in the score or something doesn't correspond to the style of the period of music we're playing in, something like that. And I really appreciate it if people do that to me as well.
And connected to what you just said is also, of course,
because then it doesn't feel like a compromise.
It's also the way you say it. Because I mean, as you said, giving a reason is already very helpful, but also, you know, not saying, you know, the other thing sounds super bad or anything like that, but just giving your approach in a very positive way, you know, even saying things like, let me suggest instead of let's do this, you know, or maybe this could be, and the tone of your voice. I think this is all very important to keeping that harmonious atmosphere that you mentioned. And then it feels much less as a compromise, and also the people are much more open to it.
And what you said,
if you impose it.
And what you said before with the style of fast and slow, I remember the first time truly observing it with our teacher, Las, this thing that whenever you have even the most radical change or even more subtle change to suggest, to always frame it as an experiment. Let's try this. And that, of course, lowers whatever shields the other musicians might have.
I think maybe before we finish the video, one example, that it's a piece that we've both played that is like so typical of this kind of situation in a chamber music rehearsal, is second movement of Schumann Quintet with the tempo marking, because the tempo marking in that piece is actually pretty fast, and it's also à la breve, and it is somehow a widely spread thing that people often also play it pretty slow, more like in the adagio region of things. So this, as a piece that I've played pretty often, is something where the tempo discussion always comes up, and it is one of those where I think it's a great suggestion to just say, you know, there are metronome markings by Schumann, so it's like, let's just try it. Like, we don't need to do it, but let's just try it, because if you try that metronome marking, it's so radically fast, you would probably not play it like that, but just to have an idea, and then it puts all the people into a completely different mindset, and then from that you can go one step back and see, okay, which tempo are we going to be playing it in now?
Of course. And generally, I mean, that is sort of a given, but what you said in the beginning, ideally don't play with people that you don't necessarily agree with. Sometimes, obviously, there are situations, especially, I think, when you are younger and in the phase of finding your chamber music partners, obviously.
Or at a festival, as
or a festival, of course, you will play with lots of people that you don't know, not that you necessarily don't like, just that you don't know, and you meet just in that setting. And, of course, as you grow older, as you play more chamber music, to find out what it is exactly about certain types of chamber music that you like, certain types of playing that you appreciate, and then of course pick your project according to that as well, obviously.
yeah, this was our discussion video for today. You can definitely let us know your thoughts about chamber music rehearsals, or maybe your experiences, what it was like for you when someone suggests something radically different, or how you would do it if you were in that position. And we hope that you enjoyed it, and we'll see you again in the next video. Bye!
Bye!